So it is the third Sunday in Lent right now as we journey with Jesus from the period between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday. It's almost like the halfway point. It's not quite, but it's getting close to that halfway point in this season. And during this time, we remember what Jesus went through. One of the things that I talked about last time was his days of fasting in the wilderness for 40 days. Lent is 40 days plus Sundays. And so we kind of get to walk alongside and remember what Jesus did during this time. And one of the things that we're doing as a church, that many of you are doing, is the digital fast. So I just kind of want to take your temperature on this. How's the fast going for those that are participating? Get some nervous chuckles. All right, yeah. Okay. Well, just as a reminder, the things that we're asking to do is to take your phone, your smartphone that's so amazing that you can't live without, and turn off the notifications. We're also asking that maybe you look at the apps on your phone and decide, these are distracting, I'm going to remove them and put a pause on them for a while. And maybe I'm going to consider letting my phone sleep in a different room than the room that I sleep in. If you're participating in at least one of those things, would you raise your hand? Hey, that's awesome. That's awesome. And how's it going? Again, how's it going? Great, good. It's going to be a mixed bag, y'all. This is not easy. It's meant to be challenging. But our smartphones are a major reason why we aren't connected to God as much as we want to be. Like, they're not the only reason, but let's be honest, they're a big distraction. And here's the problem. This is a thing that we all know about and agree on. Nobody goes, not for me. I'm good, actually. And we don't do much about. So what we're stepping into in this season as a church and doing it together, whether you're doing one or none of those things, by the way, you can start now. It's not like you had to start on Ash Wednesday. You can start today with one of those things. I just want today to be like a double down on that, all right? Like, once we get in that first week, it's usually kind of exhilarating, like, I can do this. This is easier than I thought, no problem. And then something crops up, and the next thing you know, we're falling back into bad habits. So let's double down together, because we all have a desire, I believe, to hear the voice of God. I believe God's way more ready to speak than we are to listen. And part of the reason is because of the things that are in the way. The distractions that are in the way, the noises that tune us out of God's voice. By the way, I believe God still talks today. I know that's not like a universally agreed upon statement. I think Caitlin's story is a good example. God still speaks today. Okay? So, we're in this stage. I want to give you a quote because at this point, we've removed or paused some of these things, but it's more than just removing something, right? This is a quote that's going to be on the screen. There's no way I'm going to pronounce the author's name. You can see why. But I love the quote. To have a good life, it isn't enough to remove what's wrong with it. We also need a positive goal. Otherwise, why keep going? Does that make sense? We need a positive goal. It's not just like, let's ditch this thing. Why are we doing this? What's the point? Let me tell you what the point is not. Our point is not to just stop looking at your phone so much. The point is not to dismiss technology because it's evil. It's not. The point is not to pretend social media doesn't exist just for a little while because someone asked you to. And there's a lot of points, but this is the goal. This is the point I want you to hear. This is a time where we can learn to tune into the voice of God because there's one less thing in the way. One less thing in the way. I read recently that the average iPhone user touches their iPhone 2,100 times a day. It seems like a lot, but I bet you if you actually counted, it might be a few of you just touched yours just to keep the quota going. What if we allowed God to touch our hearts that many times a day? Or we reached out to listen to God that many times a day? What might happen? What might happen? I know it's a lot. Psalm 119 says, turn my eyes from looking at what is worthless. Give me life in your ways. Turn my eyes from looking at things that are worthless. I got to just have some confession time today. You all right? You okay with that? I got to. Okay. This week, I turned my eyes to some things that were pretty worthless in the grand scheme of life. I was preparing for this sermon, and I'm sitting there at my table, and I got my laptop open, and I'm writing some things down. I'm getting in the zone. I remember, didn't the NCAA tournament start today? I think it did. I know it did. I filled out a bracket. And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my trusty iPad here, and I'm just going to open it up, just set it off to the side here, and just check in. Because that's all, right? Just a little check-in, no big deal. I don't know if y'all know this, but YouTube TV lets you watch 4 games at a time. 4. So I'm like, that's probably the best use of my technology here. I got 4 games literally going, or commercials, at one time, and I thought, this is great. This isn't a distraction at all. And it took me about 5 or 10 minutes, which I'm a little bit ashamed about, to be like, wait a minute. I'm preparing this sermon talking about digital distraction, and I'm literally distracting myself into oblivion, and I closed it. I really did. I literally laughed out loud. No one was around. I was just like, oh, okay, I get it, God. Thanks. But we all want to hear God's voice more clearly, don't we? And we let things get in the way. Things that on the surface are not bad. Like basketball's not bad. It's really fun and great. But when I decide to put it in a place it doesn't deserve to be in, it keeps me from hearing God's voice. Pray with me real fast. Lord, would you come and open up ears and hearts today? We thank you that you are with us. And I pray right now that you would refocus us for the rest of our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I don't need to convince you this is a problem. Maybe my story already did. But I just want to give you a few more data points to just kind of nudge you over that edge. Here's one. Time spent using smartphones among adults in America went from 3 hours and 38 minutes during COVID to 4 hours and 2 minutes now. Just when you want to blame COVID for everything, we've actually started looking at our phones more since then. 45% of students say that they're online all the time, even during class. 47% of parents think their kids are addicted to their devices. That's a strong word, addicted. 53% of Americans say that they've never been without their smartphone for more than 24 hours. Never. And a growing number of people sleep with their smartphones in their beds. This is a real thing. This is not my move, thankfully. I'm the NCAA tournament distraction guy. But there's a lot of people that sleep with their phones, and I had to look that up. I was like, what is this about? It's not like you take your phone and it's like a teddy bear, and you're like hugging it and trying to fall asleep. It's more like you're in bed looking, scrolling, and then you fall asleep. And then it's right there. This is a real thing. It's a little distressing, isn't it? Isn't it? If you do that, no shame. No shame. We're all in this together. This might be a bit of a problem, is my point, okay? These distractions might be a barrier between us and God. But there's good news. There's good news. It's not all bad. A lot of nervous laughing today. I get it. The Bible is really here to help us. So would you open yours to John chapter 10? John chapter 10. Before we read, I just want to let you know kind of where we're parachuting into. You can use your phones for the Bible, Peggy, yes. I know I just made the phone really bad. You can touch your phone one of the 2,000 times to look up scripture. See, they're not evil. They have the Bible on them, right? I want to let you know where we're parachuting into in the story here, because the Bible's such an amazing, expansive story, and we just pull little stories out to help us, but there's a lot going on. So here's what's going on. In John chapter 9, Jesus does this amazing healing of a man that was born blind. And after this happens, the Pharisees are trying to get him. And so they're talking to this guy, and they're like, who's this Jesus that you're talking about? What happened? They go and interview his parents, like, was this guy really blind? They're doing all this investigative work, and the guy's eventually just like, look, I don't know who he was or how this happened, but I know I was blind and now I'm not. He kind of summarizes it. And so the Pharisees are continuing to have this discussion with Jesus. And I mention that because then chapter 10 starts, and it's not an amazing chapter break. So maybe you know this. At one time, the Bible didn't have chapter breaks. And someone generously came in and made them, and for the most part, did a great job. This is not the best job, because I think we transition into this story, we don't think about who Jesus is talking to. He's talking to the Pharisees, and the context is that he's done this healing, and there's a bunch of questioning around it. So we pick up in John 10. You with me? All right. I'm going to read. It's going to be on your screens here as well. Jesus says this, "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they'll turn away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers." Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Jesus said again, "Truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and he will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance." A little later in the chapter, he says in verse 27, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me." Okay, have you heard this one before? It's pretty good. Pretty good. That context, I think, matters. You know, he's talking to the Pharisees. There's this healing that's happened. And a little bit about what Jesus is doing here is he's explaining who he is. The first 5 verses are a parable. Jesus loved to talk in parables. And parables are often really hard to understand. This one's hard to understand, isn't it? Let's be honest. But Jesus also often said, those that have ears, let them hear. If you're ready to hear what I have to say, you might understand it differently. And everyone's not always ready. But I want to point out a few things. We're going to put a picture on the screen right now. This is a picture of it's a drawing, not a picture. It's a drawing of what a sheep pen might have looked like in the ancient Near East, especially during wintertime. And you see that it's like this stone enclosure. Not in this drawing, there might have been some briars on top to keep the sheep into the pen. And you see our shepherd there right at the gate to give you an idea of kind of what this might have looked like. So one of the things that I believe Jesus is saying here is that he's saying, I am the good shepherd. So why is he saying that? Why is that important for him to point out when he's saying this to the people he's talking to? Well, one of the reasons is that there have been a lot of shepherds throughout the history of Israel that have not been good shepherds, right? And he says, I am the good shepherd, actually. I have come to redeem this. This is what he does. Remember how he redeemed things in the wilderness in our last talk, that Israel failed? He's doing it again. He says, I am the good shepherd. He even references, he doesn't reference directly, but I think about Ezekiel 34 a lot. You can look at that in your spare time. But basically, Ezekiel 34 portrays God's condemnation of the leaders of Israel for neglecting their duty to care for people. He compares them to negligent shepherds. And God promises to personally shepherd his flock, ensuring justice and compassion for his people. So it's kind of like this. Jesus is talking, and he's like, look, I'm the good shepherd. This is what I'm coming to do. If you don't get it, because they're questioning, like, what are you doing? What happened with this healing? And he's like, actually, what I just did is a great example. I called for my sheep, the blind man. He was healed. He hears my voice, and he's following me. This is what I've done. And so many other people have called out and tried to lead and done a poor job. Jesus is the Redeemer in this situation. But it's really hard to understand. And so verses 7 and 9, he kind of repeats himself. I am the gate. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. He's talking about the failed leaders of Israel in the past. He may be talking about the Pharisees that he was looking at. But they didn't understand. If anyone enters by me, he'll be saved and come in and go out and find pasture. And this highlights another part of the shepherd's role. He's the gate or the door. See in this picture, a lot of times shepherds would sleep at the gate as a form of protection for their sheep. Remember Ezekiel 34? You guys are not protecting the sheep. You're doing a terrible job. And Jesus is like, this is who I am. This is what I've come to do. And my voice matters a whole lot. So everybody's favorite verse in this passage, and the one we're going to spend the rest of our time on really, is verse 10. What does verse 10 say? A thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. So first, who's the thief? Who's the thief? Anybody know who the thief is? I think the most common answer is that it's the devil, that it's the enemy. And these are things that he does, aren't they? I want to say, actually, though, in this context, Jesus was probably talking about the failed leaders of Israel. Remember, he said thieves earlier when he was talking about them, and he says thieves again. I don't know that he's switching it. But I think both things should be in our view. This is what the enemy does. This is his MO, isn't it? And he's doing it through our digital distractions. He's stealing, he's killing, and he's destroying. You say, that sounds a little dramatic. But I want to walk through each of those. Steal, kill, destroy, okay? I know they're super uplifting, but just stay with me, all right? Stay with me. So the word steal in Greek is the word klepto. You may be familiar with the term kleptomaniac, right? People that involuntarily have this urge to steal things. And in Greco-Roman culture, this word was used to describe stealing in such a clever way that the victim doesn't even know they've been stolen from. Think about like if you've ever been a victim of like a pickpocket or something, and it took you several hours to recognize that maybe you'd lost a wallet. This is the type of stealing we're talking about here. It's secretive. It's not obvious or overt. So what's being stolen in 2025 in our lives when it comes to our digital distractions? Well, all that, yes, and attention. Time is a huge thing. These are some of our most important resources, by the way, time and attention. Tristan Harris is a former product philosopher at Google, and he said the tech industry is at an arms race for people's attention. He went on to say, as a general rule, with most of tech, it's intentionally designed and engineered for distraction and addiction. Intentionally trying to distract you and me, and intentionally trying to addict you and me. This is what we're up against. Seth Godin, who's an author and motivational speaker, points out, your phone doesn't work for you, but you work for your phone. Did you know that? The phone works for Apple or Google or Facebook. We want to believe we're the customer, but that's not the business model. We're the product. What's being sold is our attention and our time. It's being monetized. And the tech industry knows you pretty well, don't they? They know when to feed you a certain ad, right? Or feed you something that you like to look at. They know the value of our excitement, our anger, our lust, and everything else. And they use it to design products and algorithms that feed it, right? They're secretly stealing our attention. I heard that the average American's attention span is down to 8 seconds, which means you've checked out long ago. Thank you for still sitting there. I've also heard a goldfish's attention span is 9 seconds, so we're losing to goldfish, y'all. Those competitive people need to rise up in the audience. Here's a great quote. Catherine Price wrote a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone. And this one will be on the screen. She says, if you wanted to invent a device that could rewire our minds, if you wanted to create a society of people who were perpetually distracted, isolated, and overtired, if you wanted to weaken our memories and damage our capacity for focus and deep thought, if you wanted to reduce empathy, encourage self-absorption, and redraw the lines of social etiquette, you'd likely end up with what? Smartphone. That's brutal. Think about that stuff. This is, again, what I said before. This is a problem. I don't know anybody that would disagree, and not much is being done about it. Right? Except for you guys. You're doing things. You're fasting. I love it. The way we interact with our devices is secretly stealing our time and attention. The enemy wants us sedated, numb, and distracted, so it's difficult to tune into God's voice. Remember, one of our goals is figuring out how to hear the voice of God. He wants to speak, but we have a hard time listening with these things that are in the way. All right, we did steal. We're going to go to kill. I know. And don't hear me, I don't want you to think I'm over-dramatizing this to make a point, okay? Because there have been research teams that have looked at the rise in depression, suicidal ideation, and even suicide deaths and tried to figure out why they're happening at a higher rate than normal. And it's actually been especially significant amongst females. They found teens reported more time in their smartphones and social media, more likely to report symptoms of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation than teens who did off-screen, face-to-face things. And multiple studies throughout the world, not just limited to teens, have found that the more exposure someone has to something like social media, the more they're likely to experience things like anxiety, depression, insomnia, decreased sleep. Am I talking to myself here? No. I don't want to be dramatic, but the enemy is killing us through these distractions. These are playing a role in things that are really, really important. And what about destroy? That's a big word, isn't it? In use of the sheep analogy, destroy is like slaughter. Like it is bad. Research shows the widespread impact of smartphones are destroying our ability to navigate the physical world. Remember when we used to be able to drive somewhere without GPS? Anybody? Looking in the mirror on this one. It's impacting the development of our social skills, managing stress, and conflict and anxiety. I saw this really sad video recently that went viral, and it was of a kid, couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, kind of laying on his side, kind of whining, and he had nothing in his hand but was going like this and doing this air scrolling and then crying. And my guess is he had his phone taken away, and he was so sad, but it was depressing. It's no reason those go viral, but this is kind of where we find ourselves. Also, this is really important, and it's definitely not limited to the next generation or to teenagers. This is for all of us, y'all. Smartphones are destroying healthy sexuality because of the ability for us to be connected to pornography whenever we want, wherever we want. That's a huge thing for any and every generation. It's not like back in the day where you go into a convenience store and buy a dirty magazine or something. This is everywhere, whenever we want it. Take a deep breath. I just hit you with a lot of heaviness. It's going to be okay. There's good news. I'm not going to end the talk right there. There is hope. The hope that we find that gives me hope is the voice of the Good Shepherd. Jesus says right after the steal, kill, and destroy part, but I have come that they may have life and have it in abundance. The Bible gives us a couple of different words to think about when we think about the word life. One is the word bios, which is like biological life. The other word is the word zoe, Z-O-E, and it's meant to be the spiritual life. And that's the one that Jesus uses in this translation. Zoe, the spiritual life. It's what he's promising to his followers. I have come that they may have a spiritual life, a rich experience. C.S. Lewis, who's an author you've probably heard of, he's best known for Chronicles of Narnia stuff. He wrote about Zoe in Mere Christianity. He said this: God created us. He invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on gas and doesn't run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. God himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. Turns out we're not designed to run on social media or YouTube or an algorithm that knows us pretty well. It knows when to feed us what it feeds us and keep us connected and addicted. We're designed to run on God and the voice of God. And if our cars aren't running well, maybe it should be no surprise that we're not putting the right fuel in. I've felt that way, man. Sometimes I'm just like, why do I feel bogged down? And then I recognize and think about what kind of fuel I've been putting in. And it's usually not the kind that my tank runs on. And then in verse 27, Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them. This is like an intimate knowing. And they follow me. And Jesus, the good shepherd, knows each of his sheep intimately, and he calls them out personally on their own unique path in life. He's called you personally. Did you know that? It's kind of cool. If you haven't responded to that call, I just want to say today's a great time to respond to the shepherd's voice, because he's calling, and we just have a hard time hearing it. So how do we tap into the abundant life? How do we learn to hear the voice of the good shepherd, turn down the volume of our other distractions, and reset our relationships with him? It feels like a lot, doesn't it? It feels hard. This is why we're doing it together, by the way. It's way easier when we do these things together than to individually do it. We just run thin. But the voice of God is the thing that changes everything. I want to tell a quick story as we get ready to kind of close up. This was about 6 years ago. It was pre-COVID. I was doing some ministry up in Oxford, Ohio. Went up with a couple of buddies. And I was worshiping with everyone. And as I worship, often God speaks to me. Probably because he's the thing I'm focused on. Also probably because I had closed my eyes a lot to try to focus on him and to worship him, just like we were doing today. And I got this picture in my head of this 8-ball, like billiard, like, black and white. And I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me, God. Do you want to say more about that? Because usually the first thing doesn't make sense to me as I'm learning to hear God's voice. But usually the first thing is important, at least in my experience. So I try to pay attention to that. Got nothing. So I just dismissed it. I'm like, no, I don't, nothing. Later on, I had a chance to do some ministry with people in the room, and a buddy of mine and myself were talking to a young couple. And I closed my eyes again, and I saw that 8-ball. I'm like, what is this? What's up with this 8-ball? Lord, is this you? And then God connected it for me in a way. And I looked at the woman, and I said, by any chance, do you have a tattoo of an 8-ball? And by any chance, does that represent something bad that happened to you? And she looked at me and she said, yes, I do, and it does, and I want to get it covered up. And so I was like, okay, wow. I wish you would have told me a little more, because I was like, tell me more, but it may have been personal. And we prayed for her, and she had a powerful experience with the Holy Spirit. And I found out later that she was on Facebook Live telling people her story. This is someone I never met before and haven't seen since. God's voice is so powerful, and every now and then we can tune in and hear it, and it can impact and change other people's lives. And it's sometimes really weird, like, what does this have to do with an 8-ball? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I want us to practice right now. We'll do this quickly. We're going to do a little listening exercise because we're trying to hear God's voice better. We want to hear the good shepherd that is calling his sheep, that knows you personally. Okay? So We're going to be quiet and listen to hear God's voice right now. So close your eyes if you would. And I'm going to ask God, you can agree with me about this. God, we just ask right now that you would give people a picture, maybe a scripture, or a word of encouragement for someone in your life. So let's just be quiet and listen for about 30 seconds. Remember to pay attention to that first thing. If there's something that popped into your head, maybe write it down or just commit it to memory right now. I want to say, you can open your eyes now. I want to say that if you got something, that's important to pay attention to, especially if it's connected to someone you need to encourage today. You should do that. You should send them a text. If you're going to see them today, you should relay that to them. It can be incredibly simple. I also just want to suggest that maybe what you heard was for you. Sometimes we don't hear for ourselves well unless we get kind of tricked. It may have been for you, the thing that you got. There's opportunities for you to talk to God more about that throughout your day, to tune into his voice in the midst of distractions that we face. And I just want to ask you and maybe give you the challenge this week, maybe try that same practice a few times. Maybe you're in the car, maybe turn the radio off. Turn your music off for 30 seconds and say, God, do you want to talk to me? I think about the story of Samuel and Eli back in the Old Testament where he's hearing this voice and he keeps coming out and saying, did somebody call me? And finally he realizes it's God trying to talk to him. This is the same God that wants to speak to you, that maybe just did. Would you stand with me? Have prayer teams come up, please.